The day the alien queen came to Earth, she wanted to talk about the future of the planet. Her arrival was not heralded by the usual chaos of invasion or the ominous hum of warships blotting out the sun. No, she came alone, descending in a sleek, silver craft that shimmered like liquid mercury under the midday sun. The world watched in stunned silence as her ship landed in the middle of the United Nations Plaza, its surface rippling as though alive. I was there, among the crowd that had gathered, a sea of faces frozen in a mixture of awe and terror. The air was electric, charged with the weight of the unknown. When the hatch opened, it was as if the universe itself held its breath. She emerged, tall and regal, her form humanoid but undeniably alien. Her skin was a deep, iridescent blue, shifting subtly with every movement, and her eyes, oh, her eyes, were like twin galaxies, swirling with stars and secrets. She spoke, not with words but with a resonance that bypassed the ears and went straight to the mind. People of Earth, her voice echoed within us. I am Queen Xylaris of the Andromedan sovereignty. I come not as a conqueror, but as a messenger. Your planet stands at a crossroads, and the choices you make in the coming days will determine not just your fate but the fate of countless worlds. The crowd was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. It was then that I noticed something. Her gaze was not one of superiority or disdain, but of genuine concern. She looked at us as one might look at a child standing too close to the edge of a cliff. Your species is unique, she continued. Resilient, innovative, and yet so perilously close to self-destruction. I have come to offer guidance, to help you navigate the challenges that lie ahead. But know this, the path will not be easy, and the choices will be yours alone. As her words settled over us, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Questions buzzed in my mind. Why us? Why now? And most importantly, what did she mean by the choices will be yours alone? Little did we know, her arrival was only the beginning of a journey that would test the very limits of what it meant to be human. Hours later, as diplomats scrambled to organize an emergency meeting inside the United Nations building and news anchors speculated wildly on every channel across every language imaginable, I couldn't shake one thought. Why did she look so hopeful? It wasn't just concern in her eyes, it was something deeper, as if she believed in us more than we believed in ourselves. The first sign that her presence wasn't just an idle warning came at sunrise the next day. Across every major city on Earth, New York, Beijing, Paris, Rio de Janeiro, massive holographic projections appeared in midair. They displayed images that defied comprehension. Entire planets reduced to lifeless husks, star systems collapsing into black voids, alien civilizations thriving one moment and vanishing into oblivion the next. And then came her voice again, not just in one place, but everywhere at once. These are not visions of your future, she said calmly. They are echoes from others who stood where you stand now. Some chose wisely, others did not. The images shifted again, this time showing humans themselves. Our wars played out like grim theater, our cities choking under clouds of ash, our oceans rising to swallow entire coastlines. But then came something different, glimpses of triumphs we hadn't yet achieved. Cures for diseases long thought incurable, cities powered entirely by clean energy, humans walking hand in hand with beings from other stars. You have within you both destruction and salvation, Xylaris continued. The Andromedan sovereignty has observed your kind for millennia, not as gods watching over mortals, but as neighbors watching from afar. We have seen your potential and your peril. By now, humanity's reaction had fractured into chaos. Some saw her as a savior. Others called her a deceiver bent on manipulation or conquest. Protests erupted outside government buildings worldwide, while others gathered in prayer or celebration. I couldn't help but wonder, what choice could we possibly make that would matter on such a cosmic scale? We were just humans, fragile creatures bound to one small planet spinning through an infinite void. But then something happened that changed everything. A small group of scientists, biologists, physicists, linguists, was invited aboard her ship after hours of negotiation between world leaders and Xylaris herself. Among them was Dr. Elena Marquez, a friend I'd known since college and someone I trusted more than anyone else on Earth. When Elena returned 2 days later, she looked shaken but resolute. "They're testing us," she told me quietly over coffee in my tiny apartment late that night. "Not just our intelligence or technology, but our humanity itself." "What do you mean?" I asked. She hesitated before answering. "They've seen species like ours before, species on the brink of greatness but also destruction, and they want to know if we're worth saving, and if we're not." My voice trembled despite myself. Elena didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out my window at the city lights below, the endless hum of life continuing obliviously even as its fate hung by a thread. "If we're not," she said finally, "then they'll leave us to whatever future we create for ourselves." The day the alien queen came to Earth, she wanted to talk about the future of the planet, or so she claimed. Her arrival was a spectacle, a moment that froze humanity in its tracks. But what began as a diplomatic overture quickly unraveled into something far more sinister. Her ship, sleek and shimmering like liquid light, descended upon the United Nations Plaza with an eerie grace. It was as though gravity bent to her will, the craft hovering inches above the ground before settling without so much as a sound. The world watched in stunned silence as she emerged, her towering form both beautiful and terrifying. Her skin, a deep iridescent blue that seemed to ripple with every movement, glowed faintly under the sun. Her eyes were twin galaxies, swirling with stars and storms. And when she looked at you, it felt as though she could see not just your face, but your very soul. "People of Earth," her voice resonated, not through speakers or any human device, but directly in our minds. It bypassed ears and language barriers alike, a universal tone of authority that demanded attention. "I am Queen Xylaris of the Andromedan sovereignty. I came here to offer you a choice, but now I see that you are unworthy of such mercy." The crowd gasped collectively. Just hours earlier, she had spoken of guidance and partnership. Now her tone was sharp, cutting like a blade through the stillness. "You squander your gifts," she continued, her voice rising with fury. "You poison your oceans, scorch your skies, and tear each other apart over meaningless divisions. You are parasites on this world, a world that deserves better than you." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some shouted in protest. Others stood frozen in fear. I was among them, unable to look away from her towering figure. She radiated power, not just physical strength, but an overwhelming presence that made you feel small and insignificant. "I had hoped," she said, her voice softening for just a moment before hardening again, "that you might rise above your flaws, that you might prove yourselves worthy of this planet's bounty. But I see now that I was mistaken." And then came the words that sent shockwaves across the globe. "Earth will be taken from you." The plaza erupted into chaos. People screamed and ran in every direction as if they could somehow escape her words. Soldiers stationed nearby raised their weapons instinctively, though they hesitated to fire on something so clearly beyond their comprehension. Xylaris raised one slender hand, and time seemed to stop. The air itself thickened, pressing down on us like an invisible weight. The soldiers froze mid-motion. Even birds in flight hung, suspended in the sky. "You will not resist me," she said coldly. "Your weapons are primitive toys compared to what I command." And then she demonstrated. From her ship emerged a swarm of drones, sleek, black machines that moved like shadows given form. They spread out across the city with terrifying speed, disabling power grids and disarming military installations in seconds. Tanks stopped dead in their tracks. Fighter jets fell from the sky as though swatted by an unseen hand. But it wasn't just New York City that fell under her control. Reports flooded in from around the globe. Entire fleets rendered useless. Satellites knocked out of orbit. Nuclear silos sealed shut by forces we couldn't comprehend. She wasn't just taking Earth by force. She was dismantling humanity's ability to fight back before we even had a chance to try. For days, humanity scrambled to respond. Governments convened emergency meetings. Scientists worked around the clock to understand her technology. Religious leaders called for prayer and repentance. But nothing worked. Every attempt at resistance was met with swift and overwhelming retaliation. And yet, there was something strange about her conquest. Despite her fury, despite her clear disdain for us, she didn't kill indiscriminately. Cities were subdued but not destroyed. Civilians were rounded up but not harmed. It was as though she wanted us alive. But why? The answer came 1 week after her arrival, when Xylaris addressed the world again through every screen and speaker on Earth. "You will serve," she declared simply. "Your labor will rebuild this planet into what it was always meant to be, a jewel among worlds." Her plan became clear. Humanity would not be exterminated but enslaved. We would become workers in our own homes, rebuilding Earth under her rule for purposes we couldn't yet fathom. But humans are not so easily broken. In the shadows of her occupation, resistance began to form. A patchwork alliance of soldiers, scientists, hackers, and ordinary people who refused to bow down. They called themselves the Last Line, and their mission was simple: fight back against Xylaris and reclaim our planet. I found myself drawn into their ranks, not because I was brave or skilled, but because I couldn't stand by and watch my world be taken from me without a fight. Our first victory came when we discovered how to disable her drones using electromagnetic pulses, a breakthrough made possible by Dr. Elena Marquez, one of the scientists who had been aboard Xylaris' ship during her initial visit. "They're not invincible," Elena told us during one of our secret meetings in an abandoned subway station beneath the city. "Her technology is advanced beyond anything we've ever seen, but it's still technology." That revelation gave us hope. And with hope came determination. We began striking back, small sabotage missions at first, disabling drones here, disrupting supply lines there, but soon our efforts grew bolder. We hacked into Xylaris' communication networks. We developed weapons capable of piercing her ship's defenses. We even managed to capture one of her drones intact for study. And all the while, humanity rallied behind us, not just those who fought directly, but everyone who resisted in their own way. Farmers who hid food supplies from Xylaris' forces, engineers who sabotaged machinery under the guise of compliance, artists who spread messages of hope through underground broadcasts. We were outmatched in every conceivable way, outgunned, outnumbered, but we were human, and humans don't give up easily. The war for Earth had begun, and no matter how powerful Xylaris thought she was, she had underestimated one crucial thing. We would rather die fighting than live as slaves. The day the alien queen came to Earth, she wanted to talk about the future of the planet. By then, the skies had already darkened under her fleet, a vast armada of ships that hung in orbit like a second moon. Her ultimatum had been clear. Humanity had failed its stewardship of Earth, and she would take control by force. Resistance was futile, she claimed. She had crushed our armies, dismantled our defenses, and rendered our most advanced technologies little more than toys in her hands. But humanity isn't known for surrendering easily. In the midst of chaos, as governments scrambled to negotiate and resistance movements rose in secret, a strange proposal emerged from the United Nations' last-ditch council meeting. If Queen Xylaris could not be defeated through force or reason, perhaps she could be swayed another way. It was a desperate gamble, one that seemed absurd on its face. But desperation has a way of making even the most outlandish ideas seem worth trying. And so they sent Jaden. Jaden Carter was not a soldier or a politician. He wasn't even a scientist or strategist. He was just Jaden, a former journalist turned diplomat's aide. He was known for his sharp wit, disarming charm, and an uncanny ability to talk his way out of, or into just about anything. He had been chosen not because he was particularly qualified, but because he was expendable. If this mission failed, and everyone assumed it would, at least they wouldn't lose anyone critical to humanity's survival. When Jaden learned of his assignment, he laughed bitterly. "You're sending me to seduce an alien queen? Is this some kind of joke?" "No one said seduce," one of the council members replied stiffly. "We need you to engage her, appeal to her better nature, and if she doesn't have one..." The room fell silent. Jaden sighed and ran a hand through his unkempt hair. Fine, he said at last. But if I die, I'm haunting all of you. 2 days later, he stood before her. The meeting took place aboard her flagship, an enormous vessel that seemed less like a machine and more like a living organism. Its walls pulsed faintly with light, and the air hummed with an energy that made his skin tingle. Jaden was escorted by 2 towering Andromedan guards, creatures with sleek obsidian armor and eyes that glowed like embers. They led him into a grand chamber where Queen Xylaris awaited. She sat upon a throne that seemed carved from starlight itself, her regal form exuding power and authority. Her iridescent blue skin shimmered in the dim light, and her galaxy-filled eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. So, she said, her voice resonating directly in his mind. This is humanity's offering? A single man? Jaden swallowed hard, but managed a crooked smile. Well, I like to think I'm worth at least 2 or 3 people. Her expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in her gaze. Amusement? Curiosity? It was impossible to tell. You are either very brave or very foolish, she said. Probably both, he replied. But I figured someone needed to come up here and talk some sense into you. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You presume much. Maybe, Jaden admitted, stepping closer despite the warning looks from her guards. But let's be honest. You didn't destroy us outright when you had the chance. That means part of you is still willing to listen. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, and Jaden could feel the weight of her gaze pressing down on him. You intrigue me, Xylaris said at last. Few among your kind would dare speak to me as you do. Yeah, well, Jaden said with a shrug, I've always been bad at knowing when to shut up. To his surprise, and everyone else's later, she laughed. It wasn't a loud or boisterous laugh, but a soft ripple of sound that seemed almost human. Very well, she said. Speak your piece. And so he did. For hours, Jaden talked, not just about Earth or humanity's flaws, but about its potential. He spoke of art and music, love and laughter, courage and resilience. He told stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Firefighters running into burning buildings, scientists dedicating their lives to curing diseases, parents sacrificing everything for their children. He didn't sugarcoat humanity's failures. He acknowledged them openly, but he argued that those failures were what made humans strive to be better. We're messy, he admitted near the end of his speech. We screw up a lot, but we learn from it. We grow. And yeah, sometimes we take 2 steps back for every step forward, but we keep moving forward anyway. When he finally fell silent, Xylaris regarded him with an unreadable expression. You are different, she said after what felt like an eternity. I get that a lot, Jaden replied with another lopsided grin. She rose from her throne then, towering over him as she stepped closer. Her presence was overwhelming, both terrifying and magnetic, and yet Jaden stood his ground. I will make you an offer, she said softly but firmly. I will spare your world, on one condition. Name it, Jaden said without hesitation. You will stay here, she said simply. With me? Jaden blinked, caught off guard for the first time since this insane mission began. Wait, what? You fascinate me, Xylaris explained as though it were the most obvious thing in the universe. Your spirit is unlike anything I have encountered in countless millennia of existence. I wish to understand it, to understand you. In exchange for your presence, your planet will have peace. The room spun slightly as Jaden processed her words. Stay here? With her? Forever? It wasn't exactly what he'd signed up for, but then again, neither was saving humanity by charming an alien queen. He took a deep breath and looked into those galaxy-filled eyes. All right, he said finally. You've got yourself a deal. And just like that, everything changed. Humanity had won its peace. Not through war or diplomacy, but through one man's audacity to believe that even the most powerful being in the universe could be reached through simple human connection. As for Jaden, well, let's just say his story was far from over. The day the alien queen came to Earth, humanity had no idea how close it was to annihilation. Her fleet hung in the sky like a silent storm. Her drones dismantled our defenses with surgical precision, and her voice, resonating in the minds of billions, declared humanity unworthy of its planet. And yet, in the end, it wasn't our weapons or our leaders that saved us. It was Jaden Carter, a man who had no business being a hero, but who became one anyway. When Jaden agreed to Xylaris' terms, to leave Earth and live with her in exchange for humanity's survival, he knew he was making a sacrifice he could never take back. He would never see his home again, never walk its streets or feel its sun on his skin. He would be leaving behind everything and everyone he had ever known. But as he stood there in her grand chamber, staring into those swirling, galaxy-filled eyes, he told himself it was worth it. Billions of lives were worth one man's freedom. Xylaris seemed pleased by his answer, though her expression remained as inscrutable as ever. "You are brave," she said softly, stepping closer to him. "Braver than I expected." "Yeah, well," Jaden replied with a weak smile, "I've always been bad at running away from bad ideas." She tilted her head slightly, as though trying to decipher him. "You speak with humor even in the face of great change. It is unusual." "That's humans for you," Jaden said. "We laugh, so we don't cry." For a moment, something flickered in her gaze, something almost tender, but then she straightened and gestured toward the far wall of the chamber. It rippled like water, revealing an opening that led to a smaller room beyond. "Come," she said simply. Jaden hesitated but followed. The guards flanking him stepped aside, their glowing eyes watching him closely but making no move to stop him. As he passed through the shimmering doorway, he felt a strange warmth wash over him, a sensation that was both soothing and unsettling. The room beyond was smaller and more intimate than he expected. The walls glowed faintly with a soft, golden light, and at its center stood what looked like an ornate pedestal carved from some kind of crystalline material. Xylaris moved toward it, her movements fluid and graceful, and as she did, something extraordinary happened. Her form began to shift. Jaden froze as her tall, humanoid figure dissolved into shimmering light. For a moment, she was nothing more than a glowing silhouette, a being of pure energy. But then the light coalesced into something new. When it faded, she stood before him again, but different. Her true form was breathtaking. Her skin was no longer blue, but a radiant silver that seemed to catch and reflect every color of the spectrum. Her hair flowed like liquid starlight down her back, and her eyes, those mesmerizing galaxy-filled eyes, burned brighter than ever. She was taller now, more imposing yet somehow softer at the same time. Her features were impossibly beautiful, sharp yet delicate, alien yet strangely familiar. Jaden stared at her, utterly speechless. "This is my true form," she said quietly, her voice still resonating in his mind, but now carrying an almost musical quality. "The form I reveal only to those I deem worthy." "Worthy?" Jaden managed to choke out after what felt like an eternity. She stepped closer to him, so close that he could feel the warmth radiating from her body, and placed a hand lightly on his chest. Her touch sent a jolt through him, not painful, but intense enough to make his heart race. "You have chosen sacrifice over selfishness," she said softly. "You have offered yourself not out of fear, but out of love for your people. That is rare among your kind, rare among any kind." Jaden swallowed hard, his mind spinning. "So, what happens now?" Her lips curved into a small smile, her first real smile since they'd met. And for the first time, Jaden felt something other than fear or awe when he looked at her. He felt warmth. "Now," she said gently, "we leave this world behind." Before Jaden could respond, the room around them began to dissolve into light. He felt weightless for a moment, a sensation like floating in warm water, and then everything went dark. When he opened his eyes again, they were aboard her flagship. The journey to Xylaris' home galaxy took weeks, or at least what Jaden assumed were weeks. Time aboard her ship seemed to flow differently than it did on Earth. During that time, he learned more about her and her people than he ever thought possible. The Andromedan sovereignty was ancient, millions of years old, and spanned countless star systems across multiple galaxies. They were powerful beyond comprehension, but also deeply curious about life in all its forms. Xylaris herself had ruled for thousands of years as both queen and protector of her people. But what surprised Jaden most was how human she seemed at times. She asked him endless questions about Earth, about its history and culture, its art and music, its triumphs and tragedies, and listened intently to every word he said. She laughed at his jokes, though sometimes it took her a moment to understand them, and even shared stories of her own world's history in return. And then there was the moment she told him why she had chosen him. "You are unlike any being I have ever encountered," she said one evening as they stood together on the observation deck of her ship, staring out at the swirling nebulae beyond. "Your spirit is unique." "I'm just a guy," Jaden replied with a shrug. "Nothing special." She turned to face him then, her gaze piercing yet tender. "You are wrong," she said firmly. "You are extraordinary." It wasn't long after that night that she revealed her intentions fully. She wanted children with him, not just for herself but for both their peoples. "Our offspring will be a bridge between worlds," she explained one evening as they sat together in what passed for a garden aboard her ship, a lush space filled with alien plants that glowed faintly in the dim light. "They will carry within them the best of both our species." Jaden didn't know how to respond at first. It wasn't exactly something you prepared for, but eventually he agreed. And so they left for Andromeda. Over the years that followed, years that stretched far longer than any human lifetime thanks to Andromedan technology, Jaden became not just Xylaris' consort, but also something more, an ambassador between their worlds, a father to countless children who carried within them the legacy of two galaxies, and perhaps most importantly, proof that even in the face of overwhelming odds, humanity could find a way not just to survive, but to thrive. But their story wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. For even among the stars there were challenges waiting. Challenges that would test everything they had built together. And through it all, Jaden would remain what he had always been. Human, flawed yet resilient. Ordinary yet extraordinary. And utterly determined never to let go of what made him who he was no matter how far from home he traveled. The day the alien queen came to Earth, humanity stood on the brink of annihilation. And yet, through an act of unparalleled courage, or perhaps sheer madness, a single man, Jaden Carter, had struck a deal that saved the planet. He left with her, Queen Xylaris of the Andromedan sovereignty, sacrificing his life on Earth for the survival of billions. What no one could have predicted was that this would not be the end of his story. Far from it. Years passed, decades by Earth's reckoning. Though for Jaden, time flowed differently in the Andromedan sovereignty. He had become more than a consort to Xylaris. He was a father to their children and an ambassador between two vastly different species. Together, they had forged something extraordinary, a family that bridged galaxies and a bond that defied all odds. But no matter how much time passed or how far he traveled among the stars, a part of Jaden always longed for home. And so, one day, Xylaris made him an offer. "You have given me much," she said softly as they stood together on the observation deck of her flagship, gazing out at a swirling nebula. "Your love, your wisdom, your courage. But I know there is still a piece of you that belongs to Earth." Jaden hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Earth's not my home anymore," he said after a moment. "It hasn't been for a long time." "Perhaps," Xylaris replied with a small smile. "But it is where your story began, and it is where our children should see what made you who you are." He turned to look at her then, his heart swelling with gratitude and something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. "You'd really come with me?" he asked. "I would go anywhere with you," she said simply. And so, it was decided, they would return to Earth, not as conquerors or diplomats, but as family. The journey back was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking for Jaden. He couldn't help but wonder how much had changed since he'd left, or if anyone even remembered him. The thought of seeing his parents again filled him with equal parts joy and dread. They had been elderly when he left, and he didn't know if they were still alive. But most of all, he worried about how humanity would react to Xylaris and their children. Their arrival was nothing like Xylaris' first descent all those years ago. This time, There were no fleets or ultimatums. Just one sleek Andromedan ship that landed quietly in a remote field outside Jaden's hometown. He had insisted on keeping things low-key. He didn't want to cause a panic or draw unnecessary attention. As the hatch opened and the ramp extended, Jaden stepped out first, his heart pounding in his chest. The air smelled like home, fresh and earthy in a way no alien world could replicate. And for a moment, he just stood there, taking it all in. Then he turned back toward the ship and held out his hand. Xylaris emerged next, her radiant silver skin glowing faintly in the sunlight. She wore a flowing garment made of some shimmering material that seemed to shift colors as she moved, and her galaxy-filled eyes scanned the landscape with quiet curiosity. Behind her came their children, 6 in total, each one a unique blend of their parents' features. Luminous silver skin like their mothers, but with human eyes, delicate Andromedan features softened by human warmth, and an energy about them that seemed almost otherworldly. Jaden couldn't help but smile as he watched them step onto Earth for the first time. They were beautiful, each one a living testament to what humanity and Andromedans could achieve together. "Is this it?" asked Lyra, their eldest daughter, her voice carrying both awe and skepticism as she looked around at the grassy field and distant hills. "This is it," Jaden said with a chuckle. "Welcome to Earth." They made their way into town on foot, partly because Jaden wanted to savor every moment of being back, and partly because their ship would have drawn too much attention if it landed any closer. As they walked along the dirt road leading into town, Jaden told his children stories about growing up there, climbing trees with his friends, sneaking into the old movie theater after hours, helping his dad fix up their beat-up pickup truck. By the time they reached his parents' house, a modest 2-story home with peeling paint and an overgrown garden, Jaden's nerves were frayed. What if they weren't there? What if they didn't recognize him? What if— The door opened before he could knock. "Jaden?" His mother's voice was shaky but unmistakable. He turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat as he saw her standing there, older than he remembered, but still very much her. Tears filled her eyes as she stepped forward hesitantly, as though afraid he might disappear if she moved too quickly. "Mom," Jaden said softly before pulling her into a tight embrace. Behind her came his father, frail but smiling, and soon they were all hugging and crying and laughing at once. It wasn't until several minutes later that his mother finally noticed Xylaris and the children standing quietly nearby. "And who are these lovely people?" she asked cautiously. Jaden hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Mom, Dad, this is my wife, Xylaris." He glanced at his children with pride shining in his eyes. "And these are your grandchildren." For a moment, no one spoke. Then his mother broke into a wide smile, the kind only mothers can give, and stepped forward to hug each child in turn while murmuring words of welcome. As for Xylaris, she bowed her head slightly in respect before saying softly, "Thank you for raising such an extraordinary man." The rest of their visit was filled with stories and laughter, and more than a few awkward explanations about intergalactic politics. But by the end of it all, Jaden knew he had made the right decision in coming back. In time, word spread about their return, and about humanity's new allies among the stars. But for now, Jaden was content just being home again, sitting on the porch with his father, helping his mother cook dinner, watching his children play tag in the yard under Earth's golden sun, while Xylaris looked on with quiet approval. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was enough. And as Jaden sat there that evening with Xylaris beside him and their children laughing nearby, he realized something. This wasn't just where his story began, it was where it truly belonged. Earth wasn't just saved that day long ago, it was changed forever.